Calvin and Hobbes says, should the Niners package their picks to move up? Draft for need or best available? Not a lot of cap space and lots of free agents to re-sign. That's an interesting one. Well, there's two schools of thought. There's one school of thought that you can never have enough depth and that you want more and more and more picks because guys get hurt. It's football and you can never be deep enough. That's one theory. The other theory is how many guys, how many rookies realistically can make your roster in a given year? The Niners had a ton of rookies this year. I think about almost 15 when you consider the practice squad and the active roster. So, and they like a lot of those players. So I would think they had such a deep draft last year that this year they might go for, they have 10 picks, but they might turn around and try to go for, a few great players instead of like if you told me that they were going to sell out their whole draft and they were going to trade up and they were going to leave this draft and they were going to have both Michael Mayer from Notre Dame and Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame, I'd say do it. Just do it. Why? Because I think Mayer's a Pro Bowler and I think Foskey's a Pro Bowler. And if you can add a Pro Bowl defensive end and a Pro Bowl tight end to what the roster you had this year, one of the deepest in pro football, you probably are going to at least go to, a Super Bowl or two in the next 2 or 3 years. So I really like those two guys. But generally, I would say do it in numbers, do it with depth. Green Bay, the year that Aaron Rodgers won the Super Bowl for them against Pittsburgh, they had like 22 guys on season-ending IR, and they still won the Super Bowl. How did they do it? They did it with depth. So I'm a believer in depth, and the Niners are an incredibly deep football team. But I would say, what are the needs? Okay. I think they need a quarterback in this draft, not a day one guy, not a day two guy, most likely, more like a day three guy. Some rookie quarterback that you want to put on the roster. I think you could always use an explosive running back, always. Receiver, they're pretty set, right? They're pretty set at receiver. Tight end, I think they absolutely need a number 2 tight end or a second number 1 tight end. And that's why I'm so hot to trot on Michael Mayer, because I think he's total difference maker. Every time I watch Notre Dame with Michael Mayer, he's dominating. He's making catch after catch. He's big. He's rumbling. He's a blocker. He's a catcher. He's nice. He's really nice. I would love to see a Kittle Michael Mayer combination for the next decade. That would be incredible. So I would say tight end's a major need. Offensive tackle is a major need. One more interior offensive lineman, I think, is a need. Those are your needs on offense. On defense, I think your primary need is a replacement for Javon Kinlaw. I mean, you need a monster, give no ground, 2-gapper with great strength. And if he rushes the passer, I mean, that's just gravy. But you got to have somebody inside that can play with, let's say, Hassan Ridgeway, if you bring Ridgeway back, next to Eric Armstead to plug up that A gap. You had DJ Jones for years, and DJ Jones was enormously strong, great inside, but you've lost him to Denver, and the Niners were not good in short yardage defense up the middle this year. So to me, defensive tackle is the primary need. Now, I like their young defensive ends, but they're all free agents. Are you going to bring back Amenahue? Are you going to bring back Jordan Willis? Are you going to bring back Samson Ebukam? Drake Jackson's there. Bosa's there. But are you going to bring back those other guys? If you do, then maybe you don't have a big need for another defensive end. But I would say one more pass rusher would definitely be, called for. I think linebacker-wise, they've got tremendous depth at linebacker, but I would always be looking for 1 or 2 fast, undersized, productive college linebackers. I don't consider it a major need, but it's always nice to have those guys. And then I think a major need is the corner. You got to have a corner, or you got to bring back Mosley, and maybe you got to do both. Maybe you got to sign a corner and bring back Mosley. And then I think you're set at strong safety with Hufanga, But free safety, Tayshaun Gibson's a free agent. Jimmy Ward's a free agent. You might need a free safety. I mean, that's another one too. It's like I mentioned before about Riley Moss. Riley Moss might be a really nice day 3 free safety draft choice. As just a guy who has great instincts, great knowledge, great cover ability as a corner at the collegiate level. I don't think he can stand up and cover man to man against NFL receivers. But if you moved Riley Moss to free safety and you could get him on day 3 of the draft, that is a very, very special football player in my mind. There was also some interesting players. I want to pull up this roster here. The NFLPA Collegiate Bowl was the other day in Pasadena, and I watched that thing start to finish. And this is kind of you know, this is a this is an interesting game because this is like these are the guys that get passed up for the East West Shrine game, or they get passed up for the Senior Bowl. So a lot of times they're more blue chip. They're more not blue chip players. They're more developmental players and day 3 players. But there's always a couple that really stand out. And the Notre Dame defensive tackle, Jason Adamilola, is, another undersized interior guy, but just ridiculous strength for about 280 pounds. And so he's another guy. He's a pass rushing interior tackle who has to play in a rotation. So he's not the replacement for Kinlaw. He's more like a replacement if you lost like a Kevin Givens, or if you needed a rotation pass rusher. But the game is so much now about rushing the passer, and it's about pass rush, and it's like now I almost would rather have an extra guy up on game day who could be that interior rusher. I mean, Notre Dame plays a lot of stunting games as well. If the Niners wind up doing more of that going forward, they've already done a lot of it this year. I think a guy like Adamilola is really interesting. Jason Adamilola, he wore 77, and really impressive player. Undersized interior player, but man, the motor, the toughness, the functional strength, really, really impressive player. Another player that stood out, I already mentioned to you Malik Cunningham, the quarterback from Louisville. He played in that thing. But if you watch TCU and Sonny Dykes' team in the national semi against Michigan, they've got a running back named Amari Dermercado who busted Michigan that night for 150 yards. And I mean, you're talking about one of the best short yardage backs in all of college football. I mean, this guy hits the pile. He moves the pile. Really, really impressive player. And he's like one of those guys where if you see him, his highlight reel is not that impressive, but you can't bring him down. You can't stop him. I mean, he's a tremendous short yardage player. Also, the UCLA tight end, Michael Ezeke, Ezeike, huge rangy target. One of the best looking tight end prospects I think I've seen this year. He's going to be fun to watch. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's, very tall, long arms, big hands, and I think is a guy that can be a difference making tight end if he gets a little stronger once he reaches the NFL. Couple other players that I thought stood out. Texas Tech has a linebacker named Krishan Merriweather, and this guy's led Texas Tech in tackles 3 years in a row. Had some huge tackle totals in some of the games for Texas Tech. And I watched Jordan Brooks, this year with Seattle, who's a former Texas Tech inside backer. And I see a lot of the same traits with Krishan Merriweather. I mean, if the Niners let Azeez Al-Shaair go at the end of the year in free agency, and he winds up going to the Texans and joining D'Amico, and they're looking for day 3 linebackers in the draft, Krishan Merriweather for Texas Tech, absolutely would be on the top of my list. Another guy who's kind of interesting, and this is another shows you how recruiting in college football has changed. Joseph Nada, who's from, I believe, Sacramento or Rockland, I think, and didn't play anywhere in the Pac-12 and just jumped to Clemson. And Dabo Sweeney got him to go play at in Clemson, South Carolina. Big physical wide receiver who's probably going to be a day 3 pick as well, and just got some dominant traits. Very strong, very powerful, and for a day 3 wide receiver, I think that's going to be a very that if he's there in day 3, I think he's a really interesting player. Also on the that was on the team that was coached by Eddie George. On the American team, which was coached by Jeff Fisher, they also had some interesting football players that I thought kind of stood out to me. One is Corey Durden, the NC State defensive tackle, very, very strong. I mean, 320 pounds or whatever he is, and he just looks like a force inside. NC State has had a lineage of really good defensive linemen through the years, and they looks like they've got another one here. Corey Durden looks like a nice player inside for them. Also, Malik Heath, who started at Mississippi State, and he's like the rare guy who transferred from Starkville to Oxford. He went from Mississippi State to Ole Miss, but he had a couple leaping grabs in this game for footballs that were thrown up high, and Malik Heath looked like he had some really dominant physical traits that were fun to watch, and I could see him having a lot of success at the next level. And then there was one more before we get out of here that I want to tell you guys about. See if I can find him on this list. Well, Lindsey Scott played quarterback for Incarnate Word, and he's an underrated player. This guy threw for 70 touchdowns this year. 70. You got to look at him. I mean, just that alone makes him interesting. Also, the Wyoming running back, Sven Titus, another interesting player. The Texas Tech running back, Roderick Thompson, or I should say Titus Swen, I should say, is the running back for Wyoming. Really interesting running back. I thought he looked really, really good. The Penn State receiver, Mitchell Tinsley, had a really good week of practice as well. Kind of shifty, made a bunch of catches along the sideline. So a lot of interesting players definitely in that one, in the NFL PA Bowl. So